Hey guys, welcome back to Steel City Sports. So today we're going to be doing our official recap of the 2024 NFL season, where I'm going to be ranking every team based on what they did this past year, and I'm going to compare that to the list I made before the season started. I'm going to leave a link in the description. That was a two-part video where I think it was just a couple days before the NFL season started. So I'm going to be comparing this list to that one just to see like how these teams performed based on my expectations for them going into the season. And I do have to say that I have been kind of sick for over a week now. Really, it was like the day before the Super Bowl I first started feeling it, and it's really dragged on. I think it's going around everywhere, but that's why there's really been no videos covering the Super Bowl or anything like that, because it's just been kind of a mess lately. But I did want to get out, a longer video. You guys haven't gotten a video in a long time, so this is really going to be a long format video. I'm going to try to get through this list as quick as possible, but if you're longtime listeners of Steel City Sports, you guys know that anytime I say that, it turns out to be a long video. And we are going to be talking about every team in this video. I'm going to try to do this whole video just in one take to just try and get it done. So we're going to see how this all plays out. But, even if I spend just 2 minutes on each team, that's, well over an hour-long video. So I'm already blabbing, and it's just the intro. So let's see. So, for me, the worst team in the NFL this year, coming in at 32, is the New York Giants. And when we compare that to the video I did before the season started, I had the Giants at 31. So, I thought the Giants were going to suck, and they sucked. They're right around where I thought they'd be. They were a disaster on and off the field. They put out a bad product. The football team was not good. And on top of that, they were just a total embarrassment for other reasons, just not only their football team, but also some of their decisions they made in the offseason. Most notably, the Saquon Barkley debacle. He was the best player on the team. You let him go. He wanted $13 million annually. That's what he ended up getting from the Eagles. And yeah, to people like you and me listening to this video, that's ridiculous, life-changing money to 99.9% of people on the planet. But relative to NFL players, $13 million annually for a guy who is your best player and was literally carrying the offense. And when you look around at like some of the money that these receivers are making, like I love CeeDee Lamb, but $34 million a year to CeeDee Lamb, he didn't have anywhere near as much impact as Saquon had. And Saquon made a third of what CeeDee did. So, and it'd be another thing if Saquon was like 35 or, 31 and wanting like a ton of money. He's entering like what are supposed to be his peak years, and he's asking for a very reasonable fair market value contract, and you let him go to the in-division rival, and he leads them to the Super Bowl. Saquon didn't really do a whole lot in the Super Bowl, but they don't get to the Super Bowl if it's not for him. Like the season he had, it's the most yards for a running back in one single season whenever you add both the regular season and the playoffs together. So we literally just saw one of the greatest running back seasons of all time with Saquon, and the Giants let him walk to their division rival because they wanted to get cheap with him. It makes no sense. And on top of that, you have the whole Daniel Jones mess. We all know that contract never made sense when they gave it to him, and he gets cut halfway through year 2 of that deal. I can't remember if that was a 4 or 5 year contract, but I mean, what a fucking disaster for that to really just blow up in their faces almost immediately, because the first year of that deal last year, I think he only played like 5 or 6 games, and he sucked in those games last year. Then this year he comes back, and he was, again, terrible, and he didn't even last the full season this year. And at least the Giants finally just accepted the fact that Daniel Jones is not a franchise quarterback. I feel like the Giants have been clinging to Daniel Jones for so long because they've just been desperate for stability at QB. They've been desperate to have their next Eli Manning, their next franchise guy, and they were forcing the wrong guy to be that. They liked everything about Daniel Jones. He's a good guy, good off the field, like a good locker room guy, but he's just so bad on the field that it's a fucking joke. And that's why the Giants were a joke this year. And they had to cut him. So, yeah, it's really, I don't think it should be a big shock to anyone that the Giants are in last place. Yeah, and I should have said in my intro, if my voice is a little weird, you might hear it cracking or you might hear me coughing throughout this. Yeah, like I said, I am still kind of feeling under the weather, so I did want to mention that real quick. But yeah, the Giants, they are in last place for good reason. Not only did their team suck, but they also embarrassed themselves with the Saquon letting him go and the Daniel Jones contract blowing up in their face. The guy that they chose to pay over Saquon, they ended up cutting him halfway through the year as Saquon leads a team to the Super Bowl. At 31, we have a team who massively dropped off from 2023 going into this year. I had this team at 16 going into the season, and they ended up being number 31 here. So they dropped drastically based on what I thought they'd be, and that was the Cleveland Browns. I wasn't a big believer in the Browns going into the year. I think I said at best they'd be like an 8 or 9 win team, maybe compete for a wild card spot. But I was hesitant on the Browns because when I look at what they did in 2023, I thought it was not something that you could repeat. I didn't think it was a replicatable recipe to have 5 different starting QBs and still make the playoffs. That's never happened in the history of the NFL. I don't think it will ever happen again. That's why I think Stefanski deserved Coach of the Year that year. But this year, it's just like this was the clearest sign of they are fucking handicapped by the quarterback position. And I'm not saying the rest of this roster is perfect, but if they just had a competent level quarterback, I think that they could be a competitive team. Deshaun Watson was horrendously bad in the games he played this year. He was with ease a bottom 5 quarterback, and it seems like he's only gotten worse in his Cleveland Browns tenure. He seems to get worse every year. Even then, they brought Jameis in. Like, Jameis is wildly inaccurate. Jameis is wildly turnover prone for sure, but they were at least competitive with Jameis Winston. Like, they beat the Baltimore Ravens with Jameis Winston this year, but I don't know what the quick fix is for the Cleveland Browns. I mean, because you do have a lot of star players on this team. You have Myles Garrett, Denzel Ward. You got a good O-line. Jerry Jeudy's coming off his best year, just made the Pro Bowl. Nick Chubb's still a big star name. Like, you have players on this team. So that's why I do find the Browns as an intriguing team, especially entering the draft process. Like, are they going to take one of these QBs? I don't know. And, I don't want to get too much into the draft stuff because obviously this is supposed to be a recap. I don't need to be going off on draft tangents. So I will be making videos about the draft, obviously leading into that. So I won't divulge too much into my Browns draft theories right now. But, yeah, very disappointing year for the Browns. And it's going to be interesting to see if they do end up trading away Myles Garrett or not and what he could potentially return. Number 30, I have the New England Patriots, and this is exactly where I had them ranked in my list going into the season. So I think there were 3 teams on this list that I had identically to the list I made before the season started. So the Patriots were one of those teams. I put it 30 before the year started, and I have them at 30 now. Again, another team that I don't think really anyone is surprised to see them really low on this list. That's just a bad roster. I don't even think it's a controversial thing to say it's the worst skill position, the worst collection of skills players out there between receiver and running backs. It's the most limited in terms of the amount of players, like good players they have. They have the worst receiver tandem or receiver core in the entire league. They have like literally no playmakers within the receiver unit. The defense fell off a cliff. I mean, it's not like the defense was that great in 2023, but it was at least competitive. It was bad this year. And, of course, Jerod Mayo, just like I predicted, was fired after 1 year. I don't want to go too much into the Jerod Mayo stuff because if you guys have listened to me for a while, you've heard me harp on Jerod Mayo a lot. I never liked that hire, and it was clear he was just a little in over his head this season. You pair a coach who doesn't know what they're doing with a really bad roster, it's not really fucking rocket science to figure out why the Patriots were bad this year. But at least they have a silver lining in that it looks like they have found their next quarterback for the next decade plus in Drake May, who I don't know if he's ever going to be like a superstar MVP guy, but I could definitely see Drake May making a couple Pro Bowls and being like a above average starter in the NFL. They just got to put players around him. But yeah, I'm not going to spend too much time on New England because, like I said, it's not a real surprise that they're this low on the list. They didn't really have any expectations. I will say real quickly, and then we'll move on, I do think it was a mistake to roll into the year with Jacoby Brissett as the quarterback. That made no sense to me whatsoever. It's not like Drake May was viewed as this prospect who needs to sit for a couple years and develop. Like, Drake May was viewed as an NFL-ready prospect, and people always talk about that with these, people say about these younger quarterbacks, these rookie quarterbacks, like, you have to sit them. I disagree. I feel like if they're better than the guy you already have on the roster, just play them. And it's clear through camp, Drake May was better than Jacoby Brissett. I don't get what Drake May gained from watching Jacoby Brissett suck for 6 or 7 games. I think it's a really stupid opinion online that a lot of people hold, is that you have to just, in a vacuum, no matter what, you have to sit these rookies. Like, no. And people always point to, like, Mahomes. They're like, oh, well, Mahomes sat and look what he's become. Yeah, well, I could actually argue the opposite of that is true, is that Andy Reid made a fucking mistake with benching Mahomes his rookie year. Like, if we knew that was what Mahomes was going to be, he should have fucking played Mahomes his first year. They could have won the fucking Super Bowl. So I just think, it varies case to case. But a player like Drake May should have never been sitting on the bench for someone like Jacoby Brissett. Because like I said, what the fuck did he gain for watching Brissett light it up and throw 50 picks in a game? What did that do for Drake May? Nothing. It's stupid. It's a bad argument. And I'm sick of seeing that. Like, everyone thinks that's the conventional wisdom online. It's just annoying. So I'll move on to 29. We have the Tennessee Titans, who I had at 25 going into the year. So they were a little worse than what I thought. And I was flirting a little bit with maybe picking the Titans as like my wild card team, my big shocker team going into the year. And I'm glad I ultimately didn't do that, because the Titans turned out to be a mess. And it all came down to Will Levis. Just can't play the position of quarterback at an NFL level. And if you go back and listen to me before the season started, I said if Will Levis fails, it's not to the fault of the Titans. The Titans put a lot around Will Levis to help him succeed. They gave him an offensive-minded coach with a background in passing-oriented offenses. This guy, Brian Callahan, was the offensive coordinator for the Bengals, so he worked with Joe Burrow for years. They brought in Calvin Ridley to pair with DeAndre Hopkins, and I know like D-Hop and Calvin Ridley are viewed as like washed now, but going into this past year, they were both coming off 1,000-yard seasons. They brought in Tony Pollard to pair with Ty J. Spears. They invested in the O-line with the 6th overall pick, drafting J.C. Latham. So these are all things they did to put around Will Levis. They embraced Will Levis with all these moves. They're like, we're trying to surround this guy with stuff so we know if we have a guy or not. And it's clear they didn't, because Will Levis was fucking pathetic this year. And it's a shame, too. It's frustrating because he has a lot of abilities. Like, he's a good athlete. He's fucking jacked. He has a cannon of an arm. But it's in between the ear stuff. The guy's a fucking moron. And people talk about basketball IQ. Well, with football IQ, Will Levis has absolutely zero football IQ. I mean, he made literally some of the most fucking idiotic throws that I think I've ever seen. And not only just the NFL, just any organized sport. Some of the throws he made, some of the fucking gestures he's made this past year have literally disgusted me. And I can't believe I ever said Will Levis had a chance to be a good player in the NFL, because he was a fucking joke this year. And he really played the Titans out of being a competent team this year. I felt like the Titans, like, you look at the roster, it's not a terrible roster, but it's just Will Levis was that big of a joke that it didn't matter. Like, he single-handedly played them out of games, and he was so fucking reckless and bad that it didn't matter the good players they had on the team. So that's why the Titans sucked, and now they have the number 1 overall pick. They don't need to worry about Will Levis anymore. They can draft Cam Ward or Shador. 28, we have the Vegas Raiders. So I had them at 24 going into the year, so they did finish even worse than what I thought they'd be. I thought that they'd be a little more competitive. They did show a little fight in the second half of 2023 when Antonio Pierce did take over as interim. They did have a winning record. They did beat the Chiefs, so I thought, okay, maybe they're a little more feisty than I give them credit for. But no, it turns out, yeah, they're the Raiders. Anytime you go into a season with a backup quarterback as your starter, it's going to be a mess. And that's exactly what it was for the Raiders. Rolling into the year with Gardner Minshew as their starter. No wonder it didn't work out. Yeah, let's roll into the year with Gardner Minshew as their QB. Like, wow, that was a fucking disaster. Total boneheaded decision there. And people were talking about, oh, well, look what Gardner did with the Colts. Yeah, well, he had Shane Steichen calling his plays with the Colts. He's going from that to fucking Antonio Pierce. If you think that's the same, you don't know what you're talking about. Shane Steichen has gone, everywhere Shane Steichen has gone, he's gotten the best out of his players. He worked with Herbert. Herbert had his best statistical years. He went to Philly. Jalen Hurts was running up for MVP that year. They got to the Super Bowl. He got Gardner Minshew's best year. So then Gardner Minshew goes to Vegas, and people think they're going to get the same version. No shit, it didn't work out. And then you have the whole Antonio Pierce thing. Again, another person that I think's a good guy. Like, he obviously knows a shit ton of football. He knows his stuff. I like his whole attitude of, like, playing that tough guy, old school football. We're just going to beat you up on the field. But should have never been a head coach. No other team in the NFL would have ever hired Antonio Pierce as their head coach because he's not a head coach. He's a positions player, or a positions coach, sorry. And the reason why the Raiders gave him this job is because their star players lobbied on behalf of him and said, we want you to give Antonio Pierce a job. Well, how did that work out? There were three main star players that were credited as the ones who wanted Pierce to stay. The first one was Josh Jacobs. He left in free agency. So there you go right there. He didn't even play this year with the Raiders. The second one was Davante Adams, who quit on Antonio Pierce halfway through the year and demanded a trade. And faked an injury to get off the team. And then your third one was Max Crosby, who, yeah, is still on the team, but has already publicly said that if they don't make winning moves, he wants a trade. And Antonio Pierce has now since been fired. They brought in Pete Carroll. I don't know how that's going to work out. I already put out a video on the coaching hires if you want to hear my thoughts on that. But it's not really, again, it's not rocket science that the Raiders were bad. They have a mediocre roster. They rolled into the year with a backup as their starter, and they had a coach who wouldn't be hired by any other team in the NFL and was clearly the worst coach in their division. So that's why the Raiders sucked, and that's why it's no surprise they're down here yet again. 27, I have the New York Jets. I had them at 21 going into the year, so I was already pretty low on the Jets going into the season. This was another team I thought best case scenario was a 9-win team. I feel like a lot of people overlooked the Jets' issues going into the season, most notably their health, their coaching staff. These were things that I really pointed to going into the year, and I feel like everyone was just kind of falling victim to the hype of, oh, it's Aaron Rodgers, it's New York, he's got all these star players. But I was like, guys, last time we saw Aaron Rodgers play in Green Bay fully healthy, he wasn't even that good. He was league average in all of his stats, and now he's 2 years older off that injury. And all these other guys that they brought in it's like they're from the fucking retirement home. Like, they're all made of glass. Mike Williams didn't even last the whole year. He's on my Steelers now. These O-linemen they brought in to revamp their O-line didn't really change anything. And I had people argue. This is crazy to me. I actually had people this season arguing to me that the Jets O-line was good. Like, that's how fucking crazy YouTube is that there are real people out there that have that opinion, that think that the Jets O-line is good. Does Aaron get himself in trouble with holding onto the ball too long? Absolutely. But if you think that Jets O-line is actually good, you don't watch the games. You do not watch football if you were of the opinion that Jets O-line was good. It was a fucking train wreck. That's what it was. And Aaron, he got more, he did get better as the year went on. I do give him credit for that. I think a big part of that was Davante getting him like his security blanket and all that. But overall, just a super hyped up team that I didn't really buy in from the start. Even like before the 2023 season, before Aaron even got injured, all the way back then. I was still having my reservations about this team. So then I went into this year with him off the injury. I was like, I just didn't see it. There was too much working against them. And I already, I could get into the whole coaching shit as well with Saleh and the management of Woody Johnson and all that, but it's just too much. It's too much to spend time on. If you really want to hear my thoughts on the Jets season as a whole, you want to get my entire breakdown of why the Jets were a failure this year, just look up Steel City Sports, My Final Jets Rant. It's one of my most popular videos from this season, and you can get my laundry list of issues with the Jets in that one. But I got to move on because I could talk about the Jets all day, and I just don't really want to right now. 26, I have the Jacksonville Jaguars, so I had them at 19 going into the year. They finished 26, so they were definitely worse than what I thought they'd be. Similar to the Jets, another team I thought best case scenario would be like 9 wins, maybe get into the wild card spot, but they were... They've just been a total disappointment ever since their little playoff run back in 2022. Ever since then, they have really, really let me down. I think they're just at an all-time low right now in terms of their value and Trevor Lawrence's value. I don't know what to make of this team. Like, I feel like the way that they've been very sloppy with how they've built this team. It's not. They haven't done a great job of putting this team together, and I feel like they kind of have taken the mindset in the offseason with free agency. They're not big spenders. Like they do sometimes, like they did pay Christian Kirk a lot, but it feels like in the grand scheme of things, they're kind of like, hey, we paid T-Law all this money. He's supposed to be like the savior of this franchise. But Trevor Lawrence isn't that type of player. Like I feel like the Jags view T-Law like he's still the Clemson prospect from whenever they drafted him. That's just not what he is. We have years and years of NFL tape on T-Law, and he's like, at best, I don't know, like the 16th, 17th best quarterback in the NFL. Maybe he's better than that. I don't know. I'd have to sit down and write out the fucking list. I don't know. But he's clearly not what they paid him to be. I think he's a good NFL quarterback. He's not a great quarterback, and they're expecting him to be a guy who can carry a poverty franchise. Trevor Lawrence not equipped to do that. He's just not good enough to do that, and the roster they've put around him is really lackluster. It's very just meh, and it feeds into that thing I said. This roster is like they're asking T-Law to be the savior, and he's not good enough to be that. And now Doug Peterson's gone. They brought in this new guy, Liam Cohen, who, to me, it kind of feels like a desperation hire. I don't know. They're kind of a mess. Like with some of these other bottom feeder teams, you can at least be somewhat optimistic. Like with Tennessee, it's like, yeah, they suck this year, but they have the number 1 pick. They can go get their new QB. The Giants are kind of in the similar position of that. With Jacksonville, it's like you already committed to T-Law for so many years, and I could see it being just purgatory. I could see it being just mediocrity for a long, long time. And I feel bad because I feel like not that long ago, it felt like Jacksonville actually had a really, really bright future. And I don't know what the fuck happened, but it very quickly dwindled. So next up at 25, we have the Chicago Bears, another team that I feel like I've spent way too much time on this channel talking about. So I don't want to spend too much time because we've done enough Bears videos on here again. If you want to hear more Bears, like in-depth Bears talk, you can search My Final Bears Rant, where it was like basically the same thing as the Jets rant, but just for the Bears. But it simply came down to coaching. Didn't know what the fuck they were doing. They had this stacked team, and that's why this team was so disappointing, is they had a great roster. That's why I picked them to be my final wild card spot for the NFC. Their coaches did not know what they were doing. That's all it came down to. Matt Eberflus is an AI-generated defensive coach I don't think any other team would have hired. They had the most important offseason in probably the history of their franchise, where they're bringing in a generational QB prospect, and they let an AI-generated defensive coach run the show with Matt Eberflus. No fucking wonder it didn't work out. Matt Eberflus. Yeah, that was a fucking real smart idea to let that guy run the show. No fucking wonder he ran it off a cliff. And Shane Waldron at OC, he lasted 10 games. He was so fucking good at his job. You feel like you would think you're bringing in this generational quarterback. you would think, hey, we can go cheap on things here and there, but at least let's get the guy who's working with Caleb directly. Let's at least get him right. Let's make sure he knows what the fuck he's doing. No, let's hire this fucking idiot. He lasted 10 games. Ugh. I don't want to go into the full-blown Bears rant because I've done it too many times on the channel, but that's kind of my thoughts. Coaches were fucking idiotically bad, and this isn't giving Caleb a pass. I do feel like people are unfairly already labeling Caleb a bust and all that, and it's not that I'm a Caleb fanboy. I don't really give a fuck about Caleb. I'm a Steelers fan. I'm just saying, I'm telling you objectively what I see, and that is the coaches did fuck Caleb over because they were morons, but that's not to say Caleb was, he's not blameless in all this, because he definitely does deserve his share of the blame, because his biggest problem, he held on to the ball way too long. And that's why I did like the Ben Johnson hire a lot, because when you look at what Ben Johnson prioritized in Detroit with his philosophy on offense, get the ball out quick, utilize play action, get the ball to the playmakers fast, and if he can help Caleb clean that up, that's really going to help. But you were never going to get that level of sophistication from this past year's coaching staff, because they're all fucking idiots. So that's why this team was so frustrating, is because it had so much talent, but then the people you put in charge to run the show, who the fuck are these people? Who the fuck is Matt Eberflus? Can somebody tell me where the fuck this guy came from and how he got this job? That's still to my day, or still to this day, blows my mind that they let Matt Eberflus have this job of Caleb Williams. That is, I'm just going to move on, but that's all what I think about the Bears. Like I said, if you want more in-depth talk about the Bears, look up Steel City Sports Final Bears Rant, and you can hear everything in-depth about that. So let's see where we're at. 24, we're at the New Orleans Saints at 24. So I rated them at 22 going into the year, so they're right around where I thought they'd be. And I just always find it hilarious when you go back to the first 2 weeks of the season. The Saints were 2-0. They beat Carolina week 1. They beat the Cowboys week 2 in Jerry World, and everyone was freaking the fuck out. And it might sound crazy now, because it is crazy, but back then in week 2, people were realistically having the conversation, are the Saints going to go to the Super Bowl? And like I said, that might sound nuts to you. You might think I'm an idiot if you weren't paying attention back then. Go look it up. I remember watching First Take at work, and they were arguing with each other. They were debating, are the Saints good enough to get to the Super Bowl after just 2 weeks? Because they beat up on a bad Panthers team, they beat up on a bad Cowboys team, and all of a sudden everyone was ready to anoint them, and I think they went on to lose 7 straight games after that. Dennis Allen was fired not long after that. And I never bought into the hype of the Saints, because ultimately all I kept saying was, I'm never going to trust Dennis Allen and Derek Carr. Dennis Allen is not a head coach. He should have never been a head coach. And Derek Carr is a total fucking fraud that I don't believe in. And down the stretch of the season, that's exactly what happened. I know Derek Carr got hurt and they had to throw Spencer Rattler out there, but it doesn't matter. It's not like Derek Carr would have changed the outcomes of those games. The Saints, I don't really know what the roster is. And I think there's a good reason why the Saints were they were the last team to find their next head coach, because I feel like they were the worst job of all the vacancies. Is because what is this team? It feels like just a mishmash of all these players, but there's really no direction. There are a lot of holes on the team. There's no future for this. I don't really know what the Saints team is. I don't know. I think they need to just completely tear this thing down and go for a full-blown rebuild now that they got their new guy, and Kellen Moore, which I think is actually a pretty good hire. All things considered, with how bad of a job I really think this is, the Saints should be happy they were able to get someone the caliber of Kellen Moore, who just won the Super Bowl with the Eagles as their play caller. That's actually a really good get for the Saints. But in terms of the players, this team needs a total rehaul. At 23, we're going to stay in the NFC South. We have the Carolina Panthers, a team that overachieved, in my opinion, because I had them rated as 32. I had them rated dead last going into the season. Why was that? Well, it was because of Bryce Young. I had really zero hope in Bryce Young. I didn't love their offseason, and yeah, I mean, I don't think it's any surprise I don't think anyone would be surprised if they would have been 32 again this year. So that's why I was pretty confident they were going to suck yet again. But it turned out Bryce Young saved his NFL career. And I did not see that coming. Bryce Young, I already had pounded the gavel on the guy's career. There's a voice crack, sorry. I told you it's going to be a little weird. I'm still a little sick. But where was I? Bryce Young. So I already pounded the gavel because when he got benched for Andy Dalton, at that point in the season, Bryce Young had the worst stats of all starting quarterbacks in the NFL. So he was just objectively and statistically the worst starting quarterback in the National Football League. That wasn't my opinion. The stats reflected that. Bryce Young was fucking atrociously bad to start off this year. He got benched for Andy Dalton. Then Andy Dalton played, I think, 3 or 4 games. He got in a car accident, broke his thumb, so they had to throw Bryce Young back out there. I had zero expectations. I think most people did. But he actually, looked good. I don't know what the fuck he did in that stretch of time where he was benched, but he looked like a competent NFL starting quarterback out of nowhere, which I thought was impossible based on how bad he looked to start off the year. But something happened when he was benched where he looked good. He looked like, hey, you can actually maybe build around this guy. They were a point away from beating the Kansas City Chiefs that one game. He really, really impressed me. I love to see that. So, and he earned himself another year as Carolina's starter, whereas, how he was playing to start off the year, I thought was an impossibility. I thought, best case scenario, he's the backup for Carolina going into next year. But the way he played down the stretch of this past year, he earned himself another season. You got to give him a lot of fucking credit for that because this kid has been through a lot of shit in his young NFL career. Being drafted number 1 overall, all that hype, all that, that shit swirling around you. That's hard enough, but then to have CJ go right after him and everyone's praising CJ and saying how great he is and how much you suck, that's got to be rough. And, he was basically traded for Caleb Williams. And even though Caleb had a disappointing year, I think everyone still was saying, at least at the time, that Caleb is better than him. So he had all this shit swirling around oh, the guy picked after you is better than you. The guy traded for you is better than you. You suck. You're a bust. You can't play. All this shit. And he was able to take all that and actually look pretty good. I'm not going to say he was amazing or elite or anything, but he did look serviceable, which I thought was almost impossible. So kudos to Bryce Young. I hope he continues to build on that. I'd love to see him succeed. And just for Carolina as a whole going forward, it's actually looking more optimistic than I thought was even possible. The Dave Canales hire might have actually been a good hire. I was critical of it at the time because I thought it was a little desperate and just kind of random. Dave Canales, really, he was a play caller for 1 year and you're going to make him your head coach. But it seems like that wasn't a terrible hire. They hit on Xavier Legette. They definitely need to draft more pieces for sure, but things are kind of looking up for Carolina. They just need to hope Bryce Young continues on his trajectory of getting better and better. So next up at 22, we have the biggest drop-off from my preseason list to this list. So a team that was extremely dominant in 2023 all the way down to 22 on this list. So I'll take a couple seconds here, and I'll let you try and guess who this is. It's pretty obvious. A team that was amazing last year. This team was in the Super Bowl last year. That, of course, is the San Francisco 49ers. They were number 3 on my list going into the year, and now they're ranked at 22. And the 49ers, I'm not going to be able to talk about everything that went wrong with the 49ers in just this little segment of this video. This is something that deserves its own formal breakdown, its own 20-minute video I need to do about the 49ers as a whole. But I'll try and quickly give you my thoughts on why the Niners season was such a disaster. And it really just comes down to injuries. It comes down to the fact that this team was so beaten up. And, I haven't seen a collapse like this in a while. They were just bad this year. And when you look around at like their great players, like Christian McCaffrey, they have relied on McCaffrey so much over the past couple of years. Ever since he's gotten to the 49ers, it feels like he has been the lifeblood. Like he has been the quarterback of this offense. Even though Purdy is the quarterback, McCaffrey has been the most important offensive piece. And with him missing so much time, I think he only played 2 or 3 games, and he wasn't even that good in those games. All the shadiness around his injuries, and who knows what the hell's going on with him. You got Deebo's totally washed. Deebo Samuel fell off a fucking cliff. And it's not like he got hurt and that led to him falling off. This offseason, he fucking fell off a cliff. He had 1 touchdown this entire season. Think about that. Like, Deebo Samuel in 2023 was still really good. And then he goes to this year. He had 1 touchdown on the entire season. So you look at the 49ers offense in past years, like, such a big component of the 49ers offense is running the ball. That's the most important part of the Shanahan offense, is priority on running the ball. So the 2 most important pieces of their run game just weren't the same. Like, McCaffrey only played 3 games and wasn't even good in those games. And Deebo, their second most important running piece, he was totally washed up this year. Like, he's just not the same player. And you look at Brandon Ayuk. They paid him a ton of money to be their deep threat receiver. He only played 5 games or something like that, and he sucked in the games he played too. You had Kittle. Kittle was like the only one of those guys that actually had a good year. He was the only one, I guess, because he was like Purdy's security blanket. But Ayuk, Deebo, and McCaffrey, all just not the same players this year when they played. And that's kind of the short answer of why the Niners weren't so good this year. Their O-line's really bad outside of Trent Williams. That Puny kid's not bad. Or Puny, I don't know how you pronounce. Dominic Puny, the rookie O-lineman they had who showed some flashes this year. But overall, O-line is really shaky. Trent Williams is not getting younger. The defense was also banged up with a shit ton of injuries as well. So, like I said, I'm going to have to make a separate video about the 49ers as a whole, but an extremely disappointing year to go from, up in the fourth quarter of the Super Bowl the year prior to missing the playoffs. And it really just came down to a massive collection of injuries on this roster. At 21, we have another one of the NFL Blue Bloods. That is the Dallas Cowboys. I had them ranked at 14 going into this season, and they're down here at 21. So it's not like I thought they were a contender or anything going into the year. I already had issues with the Cowboys entering the season. And I made a video before the season started. It was 5 reasons why the Cowboys won't make the playoffs this year. And I pointed to a lot of my concerns. They had the worst running back unit going in to the season. This was Dak's worst O-line. These were the two main points I pointed to as to why Dallas wasn't going to be that good this year. It's Dak's worst O-line, and it was the worst running back unit in the entire NFL. These are 2 things that Dak Prescott has heavily relied upon throughout his entire career, is a stable run game and a good offensive line, and they were both significantly downgraded. These are both the worst versions of both of those units that Dak Prescott has played with his entire career. And the offense was extremely predictable when Dak was healthy because CeeDee Lamb's the only playmaker on this offense. So the whole offense, the opposing defense knew, they're just trying to get the ball to CeeDee Lamb. And so it was a very predictable, stale offense. The defense was already supremely overrated and was not good this year. This was exactly what I thought was going to happen to this Dallas defense. And I get it. They had their injuries. I'm not overriding that. I know Micah Parsons was hurt and Diggs was hurt and Bland was hurt and all that shit. But I was never a big believer in that defense to start with. And I've gone over that ad nauseum. I'm not going to divulge into that now. If you really want my breakdown on my problems with Dallas's defense, you can comment and we can get into an argument down in the comments if you want. But I'm so sick of talking about this Cowboys team. The Mike Zimmer hire I thought was really bad. I don't know why people thought the Mike Zimmer hire was going to work out. Because I said right when they did it, I was like, if this were 2014, then yeah, I'd say this was a good hire. But it's not 2014. It was 2024 when they hired him. And He's totally outdated. The philosophy Mike Zimmer brings to football is 100% outdated, and it didn't really make a whole lot of sense to hire him in 2024. So, yeah, I just, it's not even fun to talk about the Cowboys anymore. Like, back in the day, it used to be fun to, like, bash on them and get into arguments with Cowboys fans. But now they're just, like, pathetic. They're just sad. Like, it's not even really that fun to beat up on them anymore. Like, that used to be, like, one of my favorite things to do on this channel was just slander the Cowboys. And deservedly so. They deserved it. But now it's like they're just this beaten down little horse in the woods, and I just kind of feel bad for them. But yeah, that's Dallas. 20 is the Miami Dolphins. I had them at 20 going into the year, and they're finished at 20. So they're another team on my list that was the same going into the year, that is the same on this list. It really just comes down to the Tua injury. I feel like if Tua wouldn't have gotten injured, they actually probably would have made the playoffs this year because they were pretty good that back half when Tua did get back. But they just made a really bad decision of not going out there and getting like a potential bridge option while Tua was hurt. They rolled with Skylar Thompson, a 7th-round pick, and that Huntley guy was terrible. And those two guys at quarterback really dug Miami into a grave while Tua was injured. And it just killed their season when Tua was hurt. So I think you really can make a strong argument that had Tua not gone injured, they would have been back in the playoffs. It's a really fair argument to be made. But, I wasn't a fan of Miami going into this year. I thought they had a really bad offseason. They let Christian Wilkins, their homegrown talent, sack monster, just walk away to the Raiders. Like, you never fucking let that ever happen. That's like team building 101. You don't let your homegrown best pass rusher just leave your team in free agency for nothing. That's what they did. They let Vic Fangio just basically quit on their team and say, yeah, like I know we have a signed contract and all that, but I'd rather just go coach for another team. And they were like, okay. They didn't even try to fight it. They weren't like, fuck you, we have a signed deal. Or they could have said, like, Philly has to give us some draft compensation. They didn't do any of that. They just said, oh, you'd rather go coach for the Eagles? Okay, go ahead. So that was stupid. I didn't like their draft. It was just, I don't know. Like, I think Miami's now in a point where I'm starting to consider them like as a poorly run team because the decisions that they made this past offseason, then not going out and getting a bridge QB option while Tua was hurt, I thought was really fucking stupid because it costed you a playoff berth with the guys that they trotted out there at QB. Like, they could have done something, traded for a backup, or even if you would have got Tannehill. I'm not saying Tannehill's amazing or anything, but he would have been better than the guys that they had there. He would have been better than Skylar Thompson, 100%. At number 19, we have the Atlanta Falcons. So I ranked the Falcons at 13 going into the year. So they were worse than what I thought they'd be. And it's really disappointing with Atlanta because this is a team that I did pick to win the NFC South, and it came down to those last two moves they made right before the season started because their biggest hole on this team entering the season was their pass rush. That's why I was really critical of Atlanta not addressing their pass rush within the draft. But then, right before the season started, they went out there and traded for Matthew Judon. Now, I didn't think long-term Judon was a great move, but short-term, at least for this year, I thought Judon, yeah, that's a pretty good move. He's a productive player. He was really good in New England, so I thought at least as a one-year rental, he would solve their issues short-term. And they also went out and got Justin Simmons, who I think a lot of people were shocked that Denver cut. Still viewed as like an elite safety, so to pair him with Bates and Terrell and their secondary and getting Judon in their pass rush, to go along with, earlier in the year getting Kirk Cousins, like I was really high on this Atlanta Falcons team. I picked them to win their division, and it looked like a pretty good pick for, a good part of this season. They were 6-3. Tampa was kind of falling apart due to injuries to Evans and Godwin. It looked like they were going to run away with this division. And then you have the infamous Kirk Cousins fall off. I don't know what the fuck happened to Kirk Cousins, but over that stretch of games, I want to say it was 6 or 7 games, he went to throw 0 touchdowns and 8 interceptions in one of the worst stretches I've ever seen. It's a historic drop-off. I've never seen something like it because we've seen older quarterbacks year to year fall off. Like 1 year they're good and then the next year they're bad. We've seen that 1,000 times in sports. That always happens. But for a player in the middle of a season to just forget how to play is really something that I've never seen, and especially for how rapidly it happened, because Kirk Cousins was playing good football. If you guys remember that game against Tampa earlier in the year on Thursday Night Football, he threw for over 500 yards. He had 5 touchdowns and an overtime thriller against Tampa. It looked like, hey, this is the best Kirk has looked. He looks awesome. And then fast forward a couple weeks later, and he's totally fucking washed. And now there's a real debate to be had of, is he ever going to suit up as the starter for Atlanta again? Probably not. And I have to give Raheem Morris his share of the blame for this as well, because he allowed Kirk Cousins to basically play Atlanta out of a playoff spot. It's not like they had no other option at QB. You just drafted a kid top 10 in Michael Penix Jr. at quarterback. He was sitting there waiting. And it's not like Michael Penix was a guy who was viewed as, oh no, he can't play now. Like, he's not ready. He's a project. That's not at all what Michael Penix was coming out of the draft. He had the second most starts in the history of college football. Michael Penix Jr. was a day one ready NFL starter. That's why I fucking criticized Atlanta so much for signing Kirk. If the whole plan was to get Penix, you don't need Kirk Cousins, because in your ideal world with getting Kirk, he would have played 3 or 4 years there. So Michael Penix would have been 30 fucking years old his first year with Atlanta. It was never a coherent thing. It never made sense with how they handled this QB situation. And luckily for them, they did draft Penix, because the Kirk Cousins thing basically immediately blew up in their face. And I have to blame Raheem Morris. He should have benched Kirk a lot earlier, because they had a 3 or 4 game lead over Tampa in this division. This was a winnable division. This team should have been in the playoffs, but Raheem Morris allowed Kirk Cousins to just play them out of the playoffs. And so Kirk and Raheem Morris deserve a lot of blame for this. And now they're going to be rolling into next year with Penix as the guy, which just should have been what it was this past year. They should have never fucking signed Kirk Cousins to start with. Moving on, number 18, we have the Indianapolis Colts, who I ranked at 17 going into the year, so they're like basically exactly where I thought they'd be. It all comes down to Anthony Richardson. I don't really want to talk about anything else on this team but Anthony Richardson, because this team is going to live or die by Anthony Richardson. Right now, it's not looking good. It is not looking good for Anthony Richardson fans out there. Just doesn't look like he's good enough to play NFL quarterback. I could see Anthony Richardson maybe having a long career as a backup, but this is his prove-it year. Like, if he doesn't fix things this upcoming year, his role as a starter, his tenure as a Colt is probably going to come to a quick end, because he was bad this year. He was just objectively really bad, and it's a shame, because I had a lot of high hopes for Anthony Richardson. I was a big believer, but he was just flat out bad. He got benched for a 53-year-old Joe Flacco. It's the inaccuracy. That's the biggest problem for Anthony Richardson. He's so wildly inaccurate. Like, he can throw the 50-yard bombs, but every play in the NFL is not going to be a 50-yard bomb. And that's what's so frustrating about ARs. He's such a good athlete. He has the intangibles. Like, he seems like a good guy. He's got the rocket arm, but his accuracy is so bad. It's so off. And that's like, I don't know if that's something that you can just coach out of a guy. That feels like a mechanical flaw of how Anthony Richardson plays football. So they're just going to live or die by AR. And that was really the story of the Colts this year was, they started off, he was disappointing. They benched him for Flacco. Flacco sucked, so they brought him back out. And it was up and down, up and down, up and down with AR. That's been the story of his short NFL career, and hopefully going forward he's going to be able to get it right. I don't love the receiver core as well. Like, I feel like the Colts receiver core is kind of similar to the Packers receiver core. It's not a perfect comparison, but in terms of they've got a lot of young guys, but not one of them really feels like the true number one, reliable receiver. So I would like them to maybe address that, especially if this is like the all-in year for Anthony Richardson. A more reliable true number one would be like a big thing for me for the Colts, maybe in the draft or in free agency. We'll just have to see. But There's really not a whole lot else to talk about with the Colts. It's just, can Anthony Richardson play football? And right now it's looking like probably not. At number 17, we have the Arizona Cardinals, a team that really overachieved for my rankings because I had them at 27 going into the year. So they jumped up 10 spots. They're just a very frustrating team for me because they're so wildly inconsistent. And that all stems from Kyler Murray because he is the most inconsistent player in the NFL. And as a massive Kyler fan, like, just because I'm a fan of Kyler doesn't mean I'm going to, lie about him or make stuff up or not tell you the truth. Like, he's just a frustrating player. He's so inconsistent, and that's why the Cardinals are inconsistent. That's why I think a record of 8-9 was that's what the Cardinals finished. It's a perfect record for this team because it's almost 500. It's like up and down. That's what their season was. And if you listen to my weekly pick'ems this year, where I picked basically every week, I picked every game. The Cardinals were the team that I had the most trouble with because they were so inconsistent. I didn't know which way they were going. You never know which version of Kyler you're going to get. But I will give Kyler his credit in this sense, is that this is not a very good football team from a roster perspective. They have a lot of holes on this team. He was still able to win 8 games with them. It's not a very good roster. I don't really know how to feel about Gannon. Like, he's just, to me, still kind of feels like a weird hire. I don't know one way or another how I feel about Jonathan Gannon. I don't really have strong opinions on him negatively or positively. It's just a weird team overall. But I have to give Kyler and the Cardinals their credit. They were better than what I thought they'd be, winning 8 games this year. I did not see that happening with just how bad their roster was. At 16, this is a team that really disappointed because I ranked this team at 5 going into the year, and they finished 16 for me. That's the Cincinnati Bengals. I had high hopes for the Bengals, obviously not as a Steelers fan, but as just an objective NFL fan. I thought the Bengals were going to be a lot better than what they were. You couldn't have asked for a better offensive season from them. Joe Burrow had legit MVP numbers. If they would have just been a wild card team, I think Joe Burrow would have won MVP. Jamar Chase putting up amazing numbers. Even the craziest part too is everyone talks about how bad their defense was, and their defense did suck, but they also had the best pass rusher, at least statistically, this year with Hendrickson. So it's I just don't know what to do with this Bengals team. It is a total fucking mess right now. To have your quarterback, receiver, and pass rusher, all these important positions playing at such a high level, and yet you're still not in the playoffs. I don't know I don't know what it is, and this is why I'm hesitant about teams that are want to pay these guys. The Brock Purdy thing is coming up. Brock Purdy wants $55 million a year. Well, Joe Burrow just took all this money, and he's even struggling to get into the playoffs with all these financial ramifications hitting the Bengals roster. So you do this with Brock Purdy, where you give him $55 million, you take half his players away. You think that's going to be okay? You think he's going to still be able to get into the playoffs, where they did it with Burrow? Burrow took the money, and now he can't even get into the playoffs because they've had to let some players go, especially on defense. Like Jesse Bates, they let him walk, and some of their corners. And I think it was also a big mistake to let go of Joe Mixon. Now, it wasn't too bad because Chase Brown ended up hitting. Chase Brown was really, really, really good for the Bengals down the second stretch, the second half of the season, but still a mistake to let go of Joe Mixon. I don't know I just don't know. This is a frustrating team. I'm glad I'm not a fan of this team because I would have been pulling my hair out all season long with how good their offense was and their defense just letting them down time after time after time. And I think they fired the wrong guy. They fired Lou Anarumo. I would have fired Zach Taylor because I don't think he's terrible, but I don't think he's great. I don't think he brings a whole lot to the table. I would have fired Zach Taylor after this season. I just don't know what to do with this Bengals team. It's frustrating, but this is what they are. They're a notoriously cheap team. They're going to continue to roll out with this team. Who knows what's going to happen with the T. Higgins thing? Even if they franchise T and just say, yeah, we're going to run it back this year, your team is not good enough to win the Super Bowl this year. So I don't know what the plan is. I'm glad that I don't have to run this Bengals team because there's so much uncertainty. And it shouldn't be that way when you have such a good player as Joe Burrow. But they've kind of backed themselves into a corner. 15, we have the Seattle Seahawks, and for some reason I didn't write down what I had them at on my original list, but I'm guessing it was somewhere around here. This is kind of what Seattle has been the past couple of years. They won 9 games, and then this year they won 10 games. This is really what they're going to be as long as they have Geno. I mean, they're only going to go as far as Geno can go, and it's just going to kind of be a mediocre team. Maybe they'll sneak into the playoffs, but it's ultimately going to come down to Geno. I did like the hire of Mike Macdonald. I do think that he showed some flashes this year, especially as that D-line got healthier throughout the season. I feel like we did see some glimpses of the defense looking really good, and they do have some high-end defensive personnel, so I do think as time goes on, that Seattle defense is going to get scary in the near future. Their biggest thing, though, is what are we doing at quarterback? Like, Geno's fine. He's better than a lot of other guys out there. But at the same time, you know what your cap is. Your cap's around 10 wins is about as good as you can get, and you're probably not going to win a playoff game. But, hey, look, that's not terrible. Like, a lot of teams out there, like we talked about, like the Giants and the Patriots and the Titans and the Raiders and the Jets, like teams like that would love to be a 10-win team and make the playoffs. So, it's not the end of the world. It's just they're kind of stuck in this mediocrity spot. And speaking of mediocrity, at number 14, we have my Pittsburgh Steelers. Listen, guys, I don't really have the energy to give you a whole Steelers rant. I had them ranked at 12 going into the year. They were 14, so I don't really know what there's left to say about the Steelers team other than I kind of just want them to clean house. I'm so just mentally drained of this Steelers team. I'm over it. Like, I'm ready for the Steelers to just tear this team down. As much as I like all these players, I'd root for them wherever they go. I can't do this anymore. Like, I need them to just tear apart the Steelers team because it's the same fucking product year in, year out. I already did crazy Steelers rants with a bunch of profanity you can already find on the channel. So I just don't have the energy to go on a crazy Steelers rant because I'm so depleted and sick of this Steelers team. Fire every coach, fire every, person in the front office, and trade every player of value on this team. That's where I'm at with this team because it's year in, year out. It's the same bullshit every time. We tried it with Kenny Pickett. We tried it with Mitch Trubisky. We tried it with this year Justin Fields and Russ, and it's just the same bullshit year after year. We look like fucking idiots in the playoffs. I'm over it. I hate to sound like so pessimistic and such a Debbie Downer, but that's what this season did to me, especially when we had the highs we had at the midway point of this year where I thought the idiot in me thought, you know what, maybe it is different this year. Maybe Russ is kind of bringing a different component to this offense and has unlocked something. Nope, turns out I was wrong because it's the same fucking team, same failure, same disappointment. I just want to move on because I'm just I'm just getting depressed thinking about the Steelers. At 13, I have the Denver Broncos, so they're probably one of my most, they were definitely one of my most surprising teams because I had them ranked at 29 going into the year. They jump all the way up to 13. That really stems from Bo Nix was a lot more competent as an NFL player than what I thought he'd be. I thought Bo Nix was going to be actually bad. Not bad. Let me rephrase that. Not bad, but I just didn't see a whole lot of upside there with Bo Nix. But he was really, really good as a rookie. I think he had an argument. Not saying he should have won Offensive Rookie of the Year because Jaden won Offensive Rookie of the Year and he 100% deserved it. But in most other years, Bo Nix probably would have won it because he was really good. And I'm not a Sean Payton fan. I think Sean Payton thinks like he discovered football. He thinks he's like God's gift to football. So I don't love Sean Payton as the guy, but as a football coach, you have to give him credit for what he did with this team, getting them to the playoffs. I thought was pretty much impossible with, especially like their offseason. They had so much turnover. They got rid of Russ, who I get it. Russ was like viewed as washed for them, but he still had a good statistical year in 2023. They got rid of him in favor of Bo Nix. They got rid of Jerry Jeudy. They got rid of Justin Simmons. Like, they got rid of a lot of these guys. I was like, I just don't think they're going to be that good, but It was their defense, really. I mean, on top of Bo Nix being really good, but their defense really took a big turn. Patrick Surtain winning Defensive Player of the Year. To go alongside that, you got to give Vance Joseph a lot of credit, their defensive coordinator. Like, the fact that his defense gave up 72 points last year against Miami in that game, and then for Peyton to, like, keep him around after that, and for Vance Joseph to be able to, like, build up this defense into what it is now, you got to give that guy a lot of credit. So Denver, definitely one of the biggest surprise stories of the year. And think about it, like, the next 5 or 10 years, like, this is the worst Denver's going to be, because it looks like they found the quarterback. They're just going to continue to add to this team. Like, Denver's going to be a real team for a while going forward. And staying in that division at number 12, we have the Los Angeles Chargers, who I ranked at 11 going into the year. So they're pretty much exactly where I thought they'd be. So everyone is just going to remember how they flamed out in the playoffs, but it was still an impressive year. You know, in 2023, they only won 5 games under the monstrosity that was Brandon Staley. And then they go out and get Harbaugh, who completely just overnight cleaned up this team, changed the identity, changed the culture of this team, deserves a ton of credit for that. Ladd McConkey, I mean, what a pick that was. Joe Alt, of course. Really, my only gripe with the Chargers is I feel like, and, you know, I could definitely be wrong about this, but I feel like, you know, Harbaugh's whole philosophy, obviously, is that he doesn't really prioritize receivers, and that's well documented everywhere he's gone. He doesn't really care about receivers. I feel like that type of philosophy really bit them in the ass in the playoffs. And I feel like that's why Justin Herbert looked so bad in that game against the Texans, is because he didn't really have a whole lot of weapons to throw to. Like, Ladd McConkey, he's good for sure, but I definitely think his stats are overinflated. Like, someone had to step up and catch all these passes, and that just happened to be Ladd McConkey. But do I view Ladd McConkey as a true number 1 receiver in the NFL? Absolutely not. I think Ladd McConkey, and again, this isn't to bash on Ladd. I like Ladd McConkey. I'm just saying, like, in the grand scheme of the NFL, like, he was probably the worst number 1 receiver out of all the playoff teams. I can pretty confidently say that. So that's one thing that I think over the run of the Chargers going forward, that's just one thing that's a little concerning about the Chargers, is because we know their coach doesn't care about receivers. We just saw in the playoffs that mindset fucked them over, and they're not going to address that in this offseason. So that's a little worrisome going forward, but they're going to be a good team. They're going to be good culturally. They have Herbert. They're going to be fine going forward. Number 11, we have the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I ranked at 15 going into the year, so they're a little better than what I thought they'd be. And I gave them a shit ton of credit for not falling apart, because that's what I thought they were going to do after Evans and Godwin got hurt. But they were able to fight through it through Bowles and Baker. Their leadership really impressed me this year. And then even when Evans came back, he didn't miss a beat. He was incredible. And obviously it was disappointing to lose to Washington, but, you know, the Commanders were just in the midst of a generational Cinderella run. So I don't really take a whole lot away from Tampa. I don't think they're really going anywhere. I think Tampa's set up to be a really, a successful, competent team for a while. So I don't think it's really a big surprise that Tampa is here. They've been in the playoffs, the past 4 or 5 seasons straight, and Baker's just coming off another great year. Like, it's kind of crazy now how underrated Baker Mayfield has become. He has now gotten his last 2 years, he's gotten his offensive coordinator head coaching job. Like 2023, Canales got hired as Carolina's head coach. This year, he had Liam Cohen. He just got hired as the Jags head coach. So if you're an offensive coordinator out there and you want a head coaching job, go be Tampa's OC for a year. Baker will get you a head coaching job. So I do really feel like Baker Mayfield is becoming one of the more underrated players around the league, because he just had an insane year and no one really talked about it. So now we're entering the top 10. Oh, real quick for 11, I did want to quickly mention Bucky Irving, because he had an amazing rookie year and looks like he's going to be a stud player. But yeah, let's move on. Number 10, we have the Green Bay Packers, who I had at 10. They were the last team I had in the exact same spot on that preseason list. So I had them at 10. They finished at 10 on this. This is kind of what Green Bay is. I have my Critiques of Jordan Love. I do feel like a lot of people rushed way too quickly to crown Jordan Love like a superstar quarterback. For me, he's just a little too reckless, and I think that was on display in a lot of their big games. And then you, of course, have the Eagles game. I don't blame Jordan Love for that. I don't blame the Eagles too much because they were just so devastated by injuries, particularly to their receivers. It feels like every receiver they had on their roster got injured in that Philly game, so I don't really bash them too much for that, but they're a team that lives and dies by their quarterback. That's really all it's going to come down for the Green Bay Packers is what is Jordan Love doing? And most nights he's going to deliver. Most games he will deliver, but every once in a while he is going to have those 4 interception games for sure. And I just don't know. I don't know if you can win a quarterback or a Super Bowl with a quarterback like this reckless. Like I've been on record in the past saying that Jordan Love, I'm not the biggest fan of. It's not that I hate him or anything. It's just I feel like people really overlook how reckless he is, and I get it because he plays a flashy style of football. A lot of people like that, but I just don't know how successful a recipe that's going to be. Like, obviously, yeah, Favre was like that, but Favre is on just a different fucking tier than Jordan Love. Like, Brett Favre won, I think, 4 or 5 MVPs, so yeah, of course he was good enough to win a Super Bowl, but he even only got one. So we'll have to see with Jordan Love. He's still really, really young. He was hurt this year, so the jury's still out on him. He could still end up being like a generational guy. We'll have to see. At number 9, we have the Houston Texans. If they would have lost the playoff game to the Chargers, I probably would have had them a lot lower on this list, but I did want to give them credit for that. I ranked them at 6 going into the year. They finished at 9, so they were a little disappointing for me, particularly in the regular season. Houston was a team I said could compete for the number 1 overall seed, and I was expecting like a massive jump from CJ, at least like 35 thrown touchdowns, but I don't know what the fuck happened with their offense. Like, feels like all the momentum of their offense from 2023 just did not follow them into 2024. And it's really head-scratching to me because it's not like they lost anyone major. Actually, they added Joe Mixon, they added Stephon Diggs to this team. So I was like, I didn't really understand why their offense looked as questionable as it did. But now they've gone on to fire Bobby Slowick, which is crazy because, you know, after 2023, there was chatter of Bobby Slowick potentially getting a head coaching gig after that year. And now you fast forward a year later and he's been fired. I don't even think he's on a staff now. So that kind of tells you all you need to know about Houston's offense and how they really disappointed for this team. It's not that their offense was terrible, but when you look around at all the toys that were on this offense, it really did not pay off for what they invested into that offense. They got to get that O-line right. That O-line is not good, although it did hold up against the Chargers in that playoff game, which I gave them credit for. Their defense is sweet. I mean, if their defense plays at the level it played against the Chargers, they can beat any team in the NFL. That is an absolute legit top 5 level defense with all the playmakers they have. So if they can just get the offense right, which is crazy to say that, like, out of all the teams where we're worried about an offense, it's Houston whenever they have all this talent. But they got to get the offense right. They get the O-line right. You know, if I was running Houston, I would use every single one of their picks on the offensive line. Every single one. Because that's clearly the biggest problem with this team. Because this team has the talent to win the Super Bowl. You have all the right playmakers in all the right positions. You have all the high-end talent, the star players. You have a team good enough to win the Super Bowl. Can you put it all together? We'll have to see. But, yeah, a little bit of a disappointing season because I was expecting them to be like in that 13-14 win, and they kind of squeaked to 10. And they really benefit from being in a bad division, definitely. Number 8, we have another massive overachiever, and that is the Minnesota Vikings because I ranked them at 26 going into the year. They jump all the way up to 8. And obviously this is on the back of Sam Darnold having the career year. This is what people thought Sam Darnold was going to be coming out of USC. This is why he got drafted 3rd overall, is because people thought, you know, he'd look like this. But unfortunately for Sam Darnold, I feel like a lot of people are really only going to focus on how the season ended for the Vikings, where the last game of the regular season was essentially a playoff game. It was for the number one overall seed who was going to get that bye, and Sam Darnold had a really bad game. And it's not like Detroit's defense was anything special at that point in time, especially with all their injuries. Then you go into the playoff game against the Rams. He had another really rough game when he might have costed himself a lot of money. Just looking at what contract he's going to get, there still hasn't been any movement on that. I still think it would be a big mistake to let Sam Darnold go just for the fact that, this is just, at least from the regular season perspective, this is one of the best seasons in Vikings history, winning 14 games. I can't tell you how many times they've done that. I'm not a fucking Vikings historian, but I do know that 14 wins is 14 wins, and you have proof here in black and white that Sam Darnold can run this system at a very high level. You can win a shit ton of football games with Sam Darnold at the helm, and I think it would just be idiotic to move off a guy like that because he had a couple rough games in big spots. Yeah, he was disappointing, but you wouldn't have even been in those big games if it weren't for Sam putting you in that position. And I just because you drafted J.J. McCarthy in the draft doesn't mean you have to move off of Sam. Like, things change. You don't need to just commit to J.J. Like, there's no guarantee J.J. McCarthy is ever going to be as good as Sam Darnold was this season. So I think it'd be idiotic for the Vikings to move off Darnold, but I also said it was a bad move for them to move off Cousins, and they turned out to be right about that. So maybe they just know what they're doing with that position, but I think it'd be a big mistake. But for Minnesota as a whole, definitely one of the most overachieving teams. It wasn't just Darnold, obviously. This is a really good roster. This is probably like the most quarterback-friendly offense in the NFL. You have to think about it. Kevin O'Connell is quickly emerging as one of the best offensive minds in the NFL. To go with all the weapons they have on this team, Justin Jefferson is, top 3, if not the best receiver in football. Jordan Addison's one of the best number 2 receivers in football. You've got a good O-line when healthy. TJ Hawkinson even looked decent when he came back from the injury. Aaron Jones looked really good. Like, there's just a lot of shit to work with on that Vikings offense. You got to give the defense credit as well, most notably to Brian Flores, who, this time after time throughout the year, I was like, this Vikings defense is limited from a roster perspective. I don't really understand how this defense is doing so good, but it's the scheme that Flores was able to draw up. And, I think if there were an offensive coordinator that had as much success on offense as Flores did on the defensive side of the ball, that coordinator would be like the top name of this past coaching cycle. It's just the fact that Flores is on defense. It's not as sexy as an offensive coordinator, and as well, he kind of comes with some baggage from the last time he was a head coach. He just did not get along with his quarterback. So it's like, okay, well, if I'm paying the quarterback all this money and I'm paying the head coach all this money, and it's like you guys can't get along, I don't really want that headache. And that's what happened with Miami, with Brian Flores basically just did not like Tua from the start, thought he was a bitch, thought he couldn't play, and was not afraid to let him know that. And I think that's he's part of that old school philosophy of like tough guy football. So I can kind of get it from that perspective. But at the other end of that spectrum, this is your fucking quarterback. Like, even if you don't think he's a super macho tough guy that can beat everyone up, you should at least be fucking embracing him and trying to like build a team around him. This is your guy. Like, you're only going to go as far as this guy. So that would be, for me at least, I'd be a little hesitant to hire Brian Flores as a head coach because I don't know how he's going to mesh with the quarterback. And ultimately, quarterback is the most important position. And this guy has a proven track record of not getting along with his quarterback. So, but you got to give him credit for what he did this year. I think he was in the argument for coordinator of the year. I know they don't give out coordinator of the year, but I think that would be an interesting award to introduce. You could argue one of the Eagles coordinators should have got it, but I think Flores definitely would have been in that conversation because it's not like he had prime Deion Sanders and Ray Lewis and Warren Sapp out there on defense. Like, they were very limited defensively in terms of their personnel, and yet he was still able to get an absolute elite top-tier unit out of that defense. So I give him a ton of credit. It's an incredible team. It's just kind of a shame how the season ended for them to be one and done in the playoffs. At number 7, we have the team that beat them in the playoffs, the Los Angeles Rams. I had them ranked at 8 going into the season. They're 7 on my final list, so they're right around to where I thought they'd be. And, there's really not much to say about the Rams other than, wow, Sean McVay. I mean, and their GM, Les Snead, how they've been able to do this rebuild basically in one offseason. Because you guys remember back in the 2022 season, I want to say, that was their off year where they were really bad and it looked like, okay, their run's over. But basically in an offseason, they rebuilt their O-line. They got a bunch of sweet defensive players in the draft. And it's like, I look at that and then I compare that to my Steelers and I'm like, we still haven't figured out O-line. They were going on like, half a decade now where we still can't solve our offensive line issues, and the Rams did it in a fucking offseason. So I give the Rams a lot of credit for how their ability to embrace change. They're a highly adaptable team. They don't they're kind of the opposite of the Steelers. Like the Steelers want to hold on to all this culture and embrace all the stuff of the past, where the Rams, they will change instantly. They'll flip players. They're really good in the draft. They're willing to take big swings in the draft. So I really do like the model that the Rams have of just a highly adaptive team. And it's paid off because they've been a very successful team over the past couple of years. They won a playoff game this year, beating the red hot, or I guess the Vikings weren't really red hot going into the playoffs because they were coming off that loss. But I just mean from a record perspective, to beat a 14-win team is crazy. But I have to give McVay a ton of credit for the culture he's built with the Rams. This is an elite top-tier franchise within the NFL. It's not really that surprising to see them high up on the list. I am kind of I don't know what the exact word would be, just kind of confused about the whole Stafford trade rumors. I don't think Stafford's going to go anywhere. It seems like every year since the Super Bowl, this has happened for the Rams, where ever since they won the Super Bowl, it feels like they are shopping Matthew Stafford. I don't know. I don't think he's going to get moved just because the contract he's on, the age he's at right now, and they're asking for teams to give up quality draft picks. I think they want a first and a second. Given Stafford's age, I don't think you're going to get that type of return, especially when we've seen the Aaron Rodgers trade blow up. And of course, there were other circumstances with Aaron. He's older than Stafford when he got traded from Green Bay to New York. And of course, he had the injury, but I just don't think teams are going to be really gung-ho about, let's trade our first and second round pick for a 38-year-old quarterback who has injury problems. I don't think that's going to happen. So I'm kind of sick of seeing the Stafford trade rumors. Maybe it will happen. I doubt it. I'm going with Stafford is going to be a Ram next year. But yeah, just a all-around great team for how they've been able to build it up through the draft in particular. I think they have had two of the most impressive drafts the past couple of years, hitting on guys out of nowhere Puka Nacua and Kobe Turner and Braden Fisk, and of course this year's Defensive Rookie of the Year, Jared Verse. And they just they're really good at maximizing people's talent. That's why they're a top tier organization right now. Coming in at number 6, I have the Baltimore Ravens. I had them at number 2 on my list going into the season. So they were my runner-ups. They're the team I thought, it would at least get to the AFC title game again, but they did come up short. They lost to the Bills in the divisional round. The Ravens were a very frustrating team for me this year because, obviously as a Steelers fan, I want to see Baltimore lose. But as an objective NFL fan, and especially someone who had Derrick Henry on their fantasy team, I was paying attention to this team. And I could, for the life of me, not figure out what the fuck Todd Monken was doing this whole year. It felt like to me, Todd Monken did not know what he was doing. And I don't know to this day why Todd Monken is considered to be a good offensive coordinator. I think he's actually a fucking idiot who's elevated by the fact that he gets to call plays for Lamar Jackson. He should be fucking kissing Lamar's ass for keeping his job. Because without Lamar, Todd Monken's a fucking bum. Because I have seen so many games this year where the game plan literally broke my brain of how fucking idiotic it was. Because again, this is another one of my typical spiels that I've gone on this channel for time after time now this past year. You're probably sick of hearing me say it if you've heard me talk about this, but if you look at the Ravens games and it's Derrick Henry, Every time they gave Derrick Henry 20-plus catches, they won pretty much every game. And then it was like every time they gave him, I think, under 11 carries, they lost every game. So it's very clear what the blueprint was for the Baltimore Ravens, was to prioritize establishing the run game with Derrick Henry. And I feel like they didn't fucking do that. They from game to game, they flip-flopped on, are we going to use Derrick Henry or not? And I felt like there were a bunch of games where I was watching, and particularly in the second half of the game, and it felt like Justice Hill was in the game more than Derrick Henry, which is totally fucking idiotic. Totally idiotic. I mean, just to have Henry out there as the decoy that he is, they have to respect the run. I mean, I just think Todd Monken's a fucking moron. He should be fired. I think John Harbaugh should be fired as well. I think it's run its course. Like, how many chances are you going to get with this team? Like, it'd be one thing if he had a mediocre roster and he was pulling the playoffs. That's kind of the argument for Tomlin, even though I kind of want Tomlin fired. I wouldn't lose any sleep if Mike Tomlin was fired. But getting back to Harbaugh, you have a fucking MVP, a two-time MVP quarterback a lot of people consider to be a generational talent, including me. And how many fucking excuses, how many fucking chances does John Harbaugh get with this guy? It's a fucking joke that no one in the Baltimore organization holds that guy accountable. Everybody walks around like he's the fucking Pope and kisses the ground he walks on. What the fuck has he done? People forget that John Harbaugh would have been fired if it weren't for Lamar Jackson. That's another guy Lamar has saved their career. They were going to fire John Harbaugh, but then Lamar's rookie year, he wins 14 games, and then the 1 seed wins MVP. Yeah, you're not going to fire your coach after that happens, but we're far removed from that. It's been how many years since that happened? We're 5-6 years now where you've had peak MVP Lamar Jackson, and you never have your team ready for these big games. You've lost how many big games? You've had the AFC Championship game in Baltimore last year. You had the Chiefs, and your game plan was a fucking joke, and yet somehow Harbaugh and Monken kept their jobs. And then this year, same exact thing. So that's, for me, I don't get why Harbaugh is viewed as like this great coach. I think he's a fucking moron and needs to go. Let's move on, though, to number 5. So now we're cracking into the top 5 here. Number 5, I have the Detroit Lions. So I ranked them at 4 going into the year. They're at 5, so right around where I thought they'd be. It's a shame what happened to Detroit this year because, if it weren't for their injuries, I really do think they could have won the Super Bowl with how good we've seen Detroit play this year, for how dominant they were. I mean, they won 15 games this year. That's not something that happens every year. The last time a team won like 15 games I can remember was Cam's Panthers, and that was, almost 10 years ago. And I know the Chiefs won 15 as well this year, but I'm talking about before that. We haven't seen a 15-win team in almost 10 years. So it's crazy when we do see that. It is a truly all-time dominant regular season team to see that happen. And for them to lose their first playoff game, and I think they were favored by 9.5 in that game. It's just soul-crushing for the Detroit Lions. I really do feel bad because this team, this roster at full health is, you could argue, the best in the National Football League, but they just were hit with so many fucking injuries that, it's not that surprising when you look at the outcome, the fact that they did end up losing. It's it sucks, but at the end of the day, they did have 20,000 injuries. So it does suck. I do kind of question what's going to happen with the Lions going forward because, the talent's not going anywhere. The talent, they're still going to have a really good roster next year, but what does worry me about Detroit is they lost both their coordinators, and that is a little worrisome because I don't know how great Dan Campbell is as a schematics guy. So kind of similar to Sirianni, he relies heavily on who his play callers are for both sides of the ball. He's going to rely on his defensive and offensive coordinators, and he just lost both of them. And, to compare Campbell to Sirianni, because they are similar, they're both CEO coaches that are motivational based, that don't do anything in terms of play calling. So when we saw Sirianni lose his 2 sweet coordinators, which were Steichen and Gannon, he lost them after their Super Bowl run back in 2022. They were able to mask it for a little bit, they started off like good that year, and then they totally fucking crumbled on the back half of that year in 2023, where they lost like 6 straight, lost to a wild card Bucks team, and had really no fight left in them. And sadly, I could see something very similar like that happening to this Detroit Lions team, because I just don't know what to think of Dan Campbell now that he has to go out there and find new coordinators, because you're not just going to find a new Ben Johnson. Those guys don't fucking grow on trees. They're not just sitting out there. So that worries me. But the silver lining would be, hey, we still got all these players. We still have all the talent. And Aiden Hutchinson's going to be back healthy again. So, it's just something to monitor with Detroit. It's something that could worry me a little, is the coaching staff getting massively downgraded with Ben Johnson and Aaron Glenn both taking head coaching jobs. We'll have to see on that. That's one where we're just going to have to wait and see. But, yeah, just a disappointing year overall because of injuries. Number 4, I had the Buffalo Bills. I ranked the Bills at number 9 going into the season, so they were better than what I thought. And I was really down on them because obviously I thought they'd still be a playoff team. I still ranked them in the top 10 going into the year. I still thought they'd win their division, but I thought they kind of missed their window because they made a lot of big moves in the offseason. They cut basically half their defense. They traded away Stephon Diggs, and I just didn't know what this team was really going to be. But they were an interesting team because I feel like they were a team of two halves, because the first half of the year I feel like they played more balanced football where they were spreading the ball around. They were trying to utilize James Cook a lot more in the offense. Then I felt like as the year went on, they just went more and more Josh Allen reliant, more Josh Allen centric. And they were like, hey, Josh, put on your Superman cape and carry us to the finish line. And that's why I was a little concerned about the Bills going to the playoffs, because I was like, you have tried the Josh Allen Superman recipe how many times, and it's failed in the playoffs. And it happened, basically the same exact thing happened yet again. They expect Josh Allen to carry them to the promised land, and it's not a fucking reasonable request to ask one man to carry an entire franchise. But at least for the regular season, they were a dominant team. We saw Josh Allen give some of the all-time great performances against the Rams. That was I'm pretty sure that was the Rams game where he had 3 passing touchdowns and 3 rushing touchdowns. That's never happened before in the history of the NFL. And they still fucking lost that game, which is crazy because it's like arguably the greatest quarterback game ever, but they lost because their defense was so bad. And then you had them, Josh Allen had another great game against the Detroit Lions as well, which was closer than it should have been because, again, their defense was bad. And that just ended up being, I think, their fatal flaw ultimately. That's why they lost to the Chiefs in the AFC title game. But this is what the Bills are. I put them in the same category, I think, as Baltimore. It's like, how many chances is McDermott going to get with this team? Like, it's just a disappointment every year. How many years of Josh Allen's career do you want to flush down the toilet before you try to make a big change? I don't know. But number 3, this was, okay, easily, by far, the biggest overachiever. You guys can probably guess who it is. It is the Washington Commanders at number 3. I ranked them at 28 going into the year. So that is a 25 rank difference between where I had them going into the year and where they finished. And where they finished was in the NFC Championship game, which no one expected. This is the greatest rookie season we've ever seen. I don't think it's remotely close for Jayden Daniels. Not only had the stats, but then the playoff success he had of beating the 1-seeded 15-win Lions team in Detroit. And, even before that, he beat the Bucks and just leading this Washington team. I don't remember the last time Washington was in the NFC Championship game. It's been a long fucking time. And for him to do that in his first year, and it's not like this is a loaded roster. Like, there's some good players, of course, Scary Terry, but the defense is not good. Like, people are kind of forgetting, like, I think Dan Quinn did a good job of masking some of their problems on defense, but overall, it's not a good defensive unit. It needs a lot of work, and it's kind of a mediocre cast of guys on offense as well. Outside of Jaden Terry, it's like not a whole lot of special, and he was able to take this team to the conference final. It's one of the most impressive feats I've ever seen, and that's why I opened the conversation is Jayden Daniels a top 5 quarterback right now? Because for a long time, it's been Mahomes, Allen, Burrow, Lamar, and Herbert. And I posed the question again. I'm not saying this is my opinion. I'm asking you guys to tell me, would you take him over Justin Herbert right now, especially when you compare how they both performed in the playoffs? Justin Herbert had probably his worst game as an NFL player against the Houston Texans, throwing 4 ugly picks, whereas Jayden Daniels led his team to the NFC Championship game as a rookie. So I'm just saying, like, right now, for the next 10 years, would you rather have Justin Herbert or Jayden Daniels? I think a lot of people would take Jayden. So I think there's a real argument to be had that Jayden could be a top 5 QB right now. And this is exactly what everyone thought Caleb was going to be. And yeah, so I'll move on, but I just can't sing the praises of Jayden enough. And I do give Dan Quinn his credit. I thought it was a lukewarm hire, but he really did a really good job of masking the defensive shortcomings for this team. And number 2, we have the Kansas City Chiefs. I had them ranked at number 1 going into the year, obviously as the reigning back-to-back champions. So we finally saw them dethroned this year. That's why they're no longer at number 1. They're now at 2. It was a weird year for them because, like, this was the most dominant in terms of their regular season record, where they were 15-2. But in terms of how they were winning these games, it was like the most vulnerable they looked. So it's a very bizarre dynamic because it's not like they were crushing these teams. This is not the 2019 Chiefs where they're throwing 50-yard bombs to Tyreek and Kelsey and all this shit. This is a different team. This team has morphed over time to much more of a grind-out, slow, defensive-oriented team. And it's just kind of bizarre that, playing this style of football was their most dominant regular season record, but also it was like where they looked the most vulnerable from a game-to-game perspective. Like, they were only beating teams by a little bit, and that doesn't matter. Like, hey, a win's a win. It doesn't really matter how you win. But I found that interesting. And then, of course, you have the Super Bowl, their last game we saw them play. It was a weird game. Like, I don't know exactly what happened to the Chiefs' offensive line, but that's something that's got to get addressed in the offseason because that was the clear biggest weakness, and I think they've been able to mask that over the past couple of years, and it was finally exposed by a legitimately great defensive line by Philly. So that would be the big thing, but, obviously there's not a whole lot of concern with the Chiefs. They've won 3 rings already. They've got Mahomes. They've got Reed. They're going to be fine going forward. They were still in the fucking Super Bowl. I know it was like a pathetic performance, but the Chiefs are going nowhere. So I have them still as the runner-up, obviously. And number 1, you all know who it is. The current reigning Super Bowl champions, the Philadelphia Eagles, are sitting atop the National Football League right now. I had them ranked at 7 going into the year. They finish atop of the list at number 1. And finally, basically everything I've said about this roster came to light. And if you guys have been longtime listeners of me, you know my whole spiel about the Eagles. I've called them a Pro Bowl roster time after time. They have so many elite players, and it finally paid off. And Jayden Daniels, Jalen Hurts finally had that big moment. Like, he played so good in that first Super Bowl against the Chiefs, but it wasn't good enough because the team around him just didn't play up to him. This finally, it felt like the whole team was finally ready and came together, and this was just a total fucking beatdown, like a total team effort to just crush the Chiefs, and it's one of the most impressive things I've ever seen. Just for it was already a big surprise to see the Eagles win this game, but it was the fashion with which they won the Super Bowl, with how they were able to crush the Kansas City Chiefs. So I think right now they are the best roster in football. I've been putting that argument out there for a while now, and I think that it's been vindicated by them winning the Super Bowl. My only question mark about this team is, again, similar, we just talked about it with Dan Campbell, is they just lost Kellen Moore. They lost their offensive play caller. We know that Nick Sirianni is not going to call plays because when he called plays, it was a fucking mess. And yeah, just because Nick Sirianni won a Super Bowl as a head coach, I'm not going to change my opinion on him. Maybe he'll go up a little bit in the coaching rankings. I still don't think Sirianni's a great head coach, but there is something about him that just fits perfectly in Philly, so I do give him credit for that. He's got the jewelry, so I'm just some idiot online criticizing him. All he has to do is fucking flex his Lombardi trophy. So what the fuck do really I know at the end of the day? I'm just saying I feel like there are a lot better head coaches out there. He's not really my cup of tea, but it's going to be interesting to see what he does now that he's losing his coordinator again. Because when he lost Shane Steichen, it was a bit of a mess. They were able to mask it, and then it fucking imploded in his face. It's going to happen again. And it's not like he's just going to be on scholarship now that he's won a Super Bowl. Doug Peterson won a Super Bowl in 2017. They fired him like 2 or 3 years later. So Nick Sirianni isn't just safe now because he's won the Super Bowl. Like, there's still going to be a lot of pressure on him, especially with how good this team is. So, but all that doesn't matter right now. We can talk about all that stuff in the far distant future. As for right now, the Eagles deserve this. They're the best team. They've got so many great players. I'm glad they won because, I had money on it. But that has been my official 2024 NFL recap, ranking every team, going through each team, talking about them. So if you made it this far, I doubt there's anyone still listening to this, listening to this moron blab for, we're probably going on 2 hours here, but if you did listen to this, I really do appreciate it. And definitely let me know all your thoughts on this. Let me know how your team did in the comments, and please like and subscribe. Thank you.